get started. All right, well, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. We are at our fifth and final introductory webinar for Crested Butte's Transportation and Mobility Plan. Today, we are joined by Carlos Hernandez, who I will introduce in just a few minutes to talk all about transit. So we're calling today's webinar Wheels on the Bus, 21st Century Transit in Mountain Communities. If you haven't met me yet or joined any webinars, I'm Mel Yema. I'm the town's long-range planner. I'm joined by our transportation planning team here of Nick Katmer, Jenna Green, and Troy Russ, the town's community development director, should be joining us any minute now. And I will introduce Carlos with his bio in just a few moments. And we are so excited to have him here today. So thank you all for joining us. This webinar is going to run 1 hour lunch and learn style, so we will wrap up by 1 o'clock. We're going to kick off with just a quick icebreaker, talk about what is the Crested Butte Transportation and Mobility Plan and how are we developing the plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Carlos to give a presentation where with this presentation, we're going to have some interactive discussion and polling throughout it as well. And then we'll leave some time at the end for open-ended question and answer. And we'll wrap up with what's next and how to keep engaging in this transportation plan. So let's start with a quick icebreaker. If you can open up a browser or take out your smartphone and go to this website at the top of the screen here, menti.com, and enter the code up there, 62712936. We want to hear from you. What is your favorite painted bus in town? So what's your favorite painted Mountain Express bus? And feel free to type it in there. And then keep that screen up so that way you can keep interacting throughout the presentation with other polling questions, as well as type in questions you have for Carlos. The dog bus, the alien bus, the mental health awareness bus. Those are all some of my favorites too. Let's hear from others. So we have 15 attendees on so far, and I can see at the bottom of the screen 3 have participated. So we'll just give another minute or two to get logged into Menti. Again, keep that website up so you can continue engaging throughout the presentation. Wildflower bus. I do love that one, as well as the Bug Bus by Leanne Canty. Just have so many great buses, and I do see our wonderful transit partners, Jeremy Herzog with Mountain Express and Scott Truex with the RTA attending today. So thank you for being here. And Jeremy, we just love all of Mountain Express's colorful buses. And this is just really showing the variety, the cow bus, the moon bus, the reef bus, the old fish bus. We have so many great buses. All right, we'll give just another 15 seconds or so, and then we'll move on. But so far, we have the most answers for the dog bus. I do love that furry friends bus. All righty, so let's move on. So before we get into talking about transit, let's just give a quick overview of what is the Crested Butte Transportation and Mobility Plan. Hopefully last year you participated or at least heard about the Crested Butte Community Compass, Crested Butte's comprehensive plan. And that plan set forth a strategic plan for the town of Crested Butte with goals and strategies to prioritize over the next 5 years. Of those goals, we set a goal of de-emphasizing cars and focusing on walking, biking, and transit. And within that, our first strategy to try to meet that goal is to conduct a comprehensive re-examination of how people move throughout the town through a transportation master plan. So that's what we are doing right now. And how are we developing this plan? We've spent this winter really doing data collection and plan preparation. So we've been collecting a lot of fantastic data and analyzing that. We've been doing a mobility survey with the community, which we will do a plug for at the end if you have not taken it yet. We have 425 responses so far, which is fantastic, but we'll do a plug at the end. It's open for another week, and we want to hear from you about how you move throughout the town. We've been hosting these introductory webinars throughout the month of March, and now we're into April to learn from transportation and mobility experts across the country on what are some things we should think about as we get into this plan. And then we're also recruiting folks to participate in the upcoming stages of the plan. So I'll also hit on that at the end as well. And then last night, we kind of wrapped up this phase with a town council work session to really reaffirm that goal of the community compass to de-emphasize cars and focus on walking, biking, and transit. Up next in May and June, we're really going to get into identifying challenges and opportunities. So we're going to have a community open house on May 4th. To present all the data that we've collected and analyzed and start talking about where are big challenge points, what are some ideas of creative solutions. We're going to host 6 focus area workshops, which we are recruiting for right now, and I'll do a plug for those at the end to really get into specific topics from traffic circulation to parking to the pedestrian bicycle experience to transit improvements as well. We're going to recruit an advisory committee from those workshop participants to continue engaging in the last phase. And then we're going to wrap up that phase with another town council retreat. And then lastly, throughout the rest of the summer and fall, we're going to draft the plan. So we're going to develop that plan with all the feedback and data we've collected. We're going to lean on our advisory committee to help us review and refine that plan. And we're going to have the community provide feedback as well and have many presentations with the town council and our partners to refine the plan and prepare to adopt it. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Carlos Hernandez to talk all about transit. We're so excited to have Carlos here today. Carlos has been one of Colorado's leading transportation planning strategists for 24 years. During this time, he also worked with mountain communities on innovative transit projects across the Rocky Mountain West, including building partnerships to launch regionally significant projects with the Roaring Fork Transit Agency, Steamboat Springs Transit, Southern Teton Area Rapid Transit in Jackson, Wyoming, and the Breck Connect Gondola in Breckenridge. Carlos previously owned a small minority-owned business, was a partner in consulting practices, the City of Boulder's transportation director, and a strategic advisor to the Tahoe Ski Valley. He's currently the transportation manager for the town of Erie in Colorado. He's a graduate of the University of Colorado at Boulder and has a chocolate lab named Ralphie. I love that name, Carlos. So with that, I will turn it over to Carlos, and let's give a hand for Carlos.
Well, thank you for having me. I haven't heard that resume in a while, and it makes it sound like I have job ADD. So it's really an interesting way to light that all up. I'm really happy to be here because the staff that you have in your group and your team is remarkable. I often thought there should be like an X Games of town staff. And if there was an X Games of town staff, this group, including your fearless leader, Dara, would be in the podium all the time. And you're not paying me for this session, so I don't need to say that, but what you have accomplished already with the Compass update has set a bar really high for the rest of Colorado. And when these plans are done throughout the state, everyone's looking to your community now and the plans that you've done as what comes next. You were the first one through the crucible during the pandemic with this unprecedented amount of growth, and how as a community you keep your character and keep moving ahead. So I'm just humbled to kind of be on the side, like the side of the circus, throwing the, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess I'm throwing the fireballs here, but it's really just important for me to be part of this because it's a really inspiring group of people. So I'm not sure you get a lot of kudos at meetings, but you deserve it. And I'm happy to be here doing this. So what I was asked to talk about was transit. So I reviewed the other presentations that have been given, and maybe some of you were at those, which is great. If you were, those were really technical. And they had a lot of data. They were math driven, and there was a purpose and intent to that, which was really mindful. Mine is more like a Pink Floyd album. So mine is going to take you on a journey and make you think at a high level and expand your mind a little bit. So this is the time in the journey here where you are at the beginning of this process, and it's time to think big, and it's time to have more reflection on what this is. So hopefully you're eating lunch, hopefully maybe you have a brownie or two that you're gonna have, and we can enjoy what we're about to do here because it's really important. So transit, which is this really weird thing to talk about in a place like Crested, right? Because when the typical person thinks of transit, they think of urban environments. They think of trains and buses and in New York City. And so when I'm out and about in my travels, and particularly through my career, when I talk about transit in the Intermountain West, and you kind of get this blank stare. People are like, why and how? And when you start to talk about the movement of people and the character of place in this kind of environment that we live in now, which is so fragile, every day getting more fragile, transit is a big part in connection into the mountain community. And so these two things are not disconnected. They're really important and they're part of your lifeline. So we're going to explore that just a little bit. I think the first topic here about transit that's worth mentioning is you've had it one way, and maybe it's time for something a little different. So communities that are like you are reinventing what transit is. And Jeremy has put together a series of presentations. I'm sure they'll get posted afterwards if you haven't seen them, about what the future of transit looks like from an operator's perspective. And he's hitting those points. And these are examples that hopefully get you thinking of accelerating that. So Moab, Utah, which you would not define as an innovative transit capital of the world by any extent, is pushing the envelope for a couple of reasons that are really key that I want you to kind of consider as we go on this journey. The first is that they're not operating transit service like get out, wait for the bus, and hopefully it comes, hopefully it doesn't. Always comes when Jeremy operates it, right? But like this whole notion, we walk out and we wait for a service, and it is no longer the way that people live, right? We're in an on-demand kind of world, and we have these pieces of device on our person that can access all this information all over the world. And so there's a more effective way to run transit service. And this example from Moab, and you're seeing this throughout the country, but particularly in the mountain communities, where you have on-demand service. And it's app and phone number. The phone numbers can be answered in a variety of languages, in a variety of interfaces for people who are visually impaired or physically impaired, and allows the people who need the service to get the service in a more effective format than just walking out and waiting. It also allows operators to source the system in a way that is more financially conservative and more effective in terms of the service delivery. The vehicles maybe aren't as cool as a dog bus. I'm sure that you could figure that piece out, but that's Moab, right? The example on the bottom, I've been talking about in Crested Butte for almost 30 years. At the 25-year mark in my career when I started, we did the first study with someone who's presented earlier. You should go back and watch Jim Charlier's presentation, which was remarkable about the role of pedestrian safety in the community. And this notion that when I was working with him 22 and a half years ago, we were talking about this connection between the town and the mountain and what would make sustainable, smart connections for that could make an investment now that would be a generational investment. And the idea of a gondola was talked and floated and spent many months kind of pondering and understanding the pros and cons of that. And since then, not only Telluride, but communities throughout the West, even urban communities, have adopted this technology as a way to manage costs in a tight labor market, to use renewable, more sustainable energies to transport people, and to provide a customer experience. So kind of two ends of the spectrum here, which is an old favorite, like an old boyfriend, or that old pair of 90 underfoot K2 Extremes that you have in your garage, that old friend that keeps kind of asking you to come back out. And then the Moabs of the world, which are the new Black Crows, 120 under feet, getting ready to hard charge on that powder day. You have to get in the realm of thinking about what transit is for you. And so mountain towns and transit are connected. Okay, next slide. So you're not alone in this, but my job is to kind of make you understand it maybe in context. You got to get to yes. So many of the problems that you're challenged with, the visceral reaction is no. And what's interesting about Crested Butte is you're a community of yes. You're explorers, you're adventurers. You live in this really remote, amazing place. You endure a lot of different weather. You endure so much. So much in your active lives and personal lives are about yes. But sometimes in the governance of Crested Butte, there's a lot of no. No, we have to have more parking. No, we can't close the streets down and have a car-free type of days or events. No, we won't fund more transit, right? There's a lot of no. And you got to get to yes, because the world is not the same place it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And frankly, continuing to say no will not get you to the climate and society that you want. So next slide. So how do you get to yes, and what is that all about? Look, I know you love the Bluebird buses. I get it. I understand it. They're part of who you are. They're your identity. But at some point, those K2 90 underfoot, K2 extremes, right, that are now your chair or on your wall, they were who you were at some point also, but you evolved forward, right? That 1988 Ritchie hardtail steel bike, which we all know and love and is a townie, right? But you don't go and ride that up at Doctor's Park anymore, right? The evolution of what transit is being held back by no. And once again, right, this is a Pink Floyd album, right? But like, you got to think about ways to say yes. And the good news is the X Games star staff that you have in this process is about beginning with all of the yeses. I read a piece about people in the community that are concerned about the conversion of your community into more sustainable energy. And they're speaking about whether there's enough capacity in the system to be sustainable from an energy perspective when you shift away from natural gas into more electric sources. And those are the no's, right? And that's okay to say no. Like, there's a space for that, but this time and place is not the space, right? You want to say yes to what holds ahead for you, for the things that you hold dear about transit. It's like when you had VCR tapes, and then people couldn't give up VCR tapes, so they made these devices where you could put a VCR tape in there and then a DVD, because you're like, well, I can't get rid of Karate Kid on VHS. I gotta have it, right? And so it's like holding on to the VHS and DVD while everyone's streaming on Netflix. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Jeremy's plan that he's outlined and some of the things I think you'll explore during this process have to get to a more compatible vehicle and a compatible service and a different propulsion system. I spent most of last season down in Taos, New Mexico, working with the Taos Ski Valley. And they're fortunate because their electric cooperative is 100% renewable during the day. So 100% of their energy comes from renewable sources during the day, mostly solar. And they're building battery storage within the system, within the grid network wide. So we were working on a green transportation corridor that would connect the town of Taos up to the ski area. And it's going to be the nation's first mountain alpine 100% renewable solar generated electric power system for transit. And that is something when you tell people, they're like, well, that's not possible because there's a grade going up of the road. No, that's not possible because there's not enough power in the grid. No, like, all of the no's were yeses. In Taos, not Crested Butte, where you have all of the other resources available for you to say yes when you can say yes. Look at Taos in New Mexico with a different economy, a different environment, and find ways to say yes. Transform the thing you love into the new thing you love with new vehicles and new service. Next one. Okay, so that's like, we're not at, wish you were here yet, or like at the first two tracks, but like, given those things, given the need for yes, given this idea that transit is part of the Crested Butte experience, what's your big dream, right? Like, what do you dream that would happen? What's the generational gift you want to give to your cousin, your aunt, your uncle, your child, your friend, the generation ahead? What is the big dream that you have for transit in Crested Butte and Gunnison Valley? And so Mel and I are going to kind of dwell here and give a little color commentary. This is about you, right? We're not here to just have Carlos talk for an hour. We want to hear what you think. And dream big, right? Okay, Mel, what are you seeing coming in? How does these things speak to you?
So I'm seeing the first things is that transit is the easy first choice, and that life's easy without a car. You don't need a car to go to the grocery store, go to the trailhead. It's just so simple and convenient and reliable that you can just hop on the bus. We're seeing some more specific things about buses having gear storage so you can recreate without a truck. We definitely kind of talk in the office about how the most times we use our car is to go ride our bike, which is a little ironic. A couple more answers around buses to trailheads year round, having bike and ski racks, and then that it's the place where you see all your friends too.
Okay. I'm seeing things that are about the experience and ease, right? And making it a place that's more accessible, which is really key. So keep dreaming, right? There's okay if there's a little quiet space, right? Put these up, make them big, right? Think about places where you've been all over the world, maybe, where you're like, oh, it'd be great if we had this here. This would be my dream, right? Don't just think of Colorado. Expand kind of the mindset. Find the yes. And we're going to give you another minute or two on this because sometimes they incubate and percolate as it's going through.
And seeing a couple of responses around that on-demand concept is really interesting too, like the Moab short bus.
That'd be a great name for it, by the way, the Moab short bus. That would be perfect. I should put this on. Dogs, kids, older, waiter, hedge fund owner, all coming together. Yeah, right. Some of you are stealing my thunder of what's ahead. I love it. We're all listening to the same music here. We're all playing in concert. And give another minute just to make sure the ponderers, people who like to think it through. And we'll ask this again at the end. So we'll have a slide at the end. So if you think of a great one, you want to write it down, right? And know too that we should have mentioned this in the beginning. This is recorded, and there are people we found. I think Mel, you've mentioned this that view these for months to come. So those of you who are watching today, and you maybe are not doing this live, these are comments and feedback that you can give to Mel and Troy and the rest of the team, right? If you're watching this and say, here's my big dream for transit. I watched that thing, right? Please do that. Please let us know. One system, easy to use. Love an area of downtown with no cars, people hanging out, having a good time, dance party certain nights, right? Like, yeah, that would be amazing, right? That's a dream, right?
Love
okay.
The dance party.
Okay, we'll ask it again. So, but we're going to keep going just so we hear from you some more. So we're going to do another few of these. So now that you kind of get the routine, give you a couple of slides, and then we'll get another impressions and thoughts. All right. So it's the experience. And I know this seems a little far out, but transit is just about a lot of it's about what you just wrote, right? It's not about waiting and moving. It's about kind of how it feels to be part of this community. And you're unique because you have people who come in and want to be you, and then you have you, right? And this experience of transit is part of the journey. So let me kind of play on that for a minute. Like when we come to Crested, we want to be you, right? We want to wear steel, or we want to wear the analogy, which I thought was great that Charlie used, was kind of like, we want to have a carabiner hanging off our fanny pack, just like you. We want to be you. We want to kind of live the life for a little while. And we want to interact with you on transit. We want to hear about the things we don't know and see. It's this transit system is part of the experience. And the way that you're branding it currently and doing those things, that can live on in a better powered vehicle with on-demand formats, right? But like, it's part of how you experience what this thing is, which is Crested. And then there's also like the experience of like living in a community where you're commingling with others and building those social equity or social capital by those interactions, getting to know the person in the community who's that amazing woodworker who's going to help you with that project because you met on transit and you're waiting in that space, right? And these experiences, which are so important to who you are, right, in your survival and how you're authentic. And you've done a great job of baking transit into that experience. But there's some blind spots that you have, right? When those crowded bluebirds and at the end of the day are leaving people behind sometimes. No fault of Jeremy or anybody. It's just you have demand, you have success, right? You have, Troy tells me that what 70% or so of the community, people traveling community are not driving around in a car. Like you've reached nirvana. But there's a tipping point to where the expectation from the people who are coming are expecting kind of a little more robust service, maybe something that's more unique to Crested Butte and more effective for them as they're getting out and doing the things that you do. In addition to that, you have young people who have not spoken in this process yet, who will be the next generation of your transit users that we owe it to find how the experience is for them. So many times in this conversation is about adults. And that's great. Like we're all going to be here a while and we're going to be paying, but what we're passing on, the legacy we give to the people in the lower level there are just important, and how that system works for them and the experience that they have. So I'm trying to get you to think about transit is not like this thing with wheels or like a thing you do just because you have fewer parking spaces. It's like in your DNA as a town, right? And you're not going to escape it and you're going to have to kind of embrace it and make it yours. Next slide. So, okay, cool. It's part of the experience. And in the experience are like the people coming in from not only kind of like other states or the Front Range, people from down valley coming in, right? And like this whole notion of being one community. So great, got it. It's about the experience. So how do we make it ours? And how do we make it thrive? Well, I think it has to be local and loved. It has to be local and loved. It shouldn't be this thing for everybody else. It's like spinach, right? No one, I mean, I guess some people do, but most people don't like to have spinach. So you put it in a smoothie, you hide it with some really good Vega powder, and now you're having spinach, right? Well, transit needs to be like your thing. It's not spinach that we're forcing or you're forcing on people to use because you're trying to save climate or save money or fewer parking spaces or have affordable workforce housing. You're doing it because it's locally, it's like how you survive and live, right? And just like the subway is such a part of the New York City culture, or the box going up and down in the valley in Jackson Hole is the identity. Transit is a part of your identity because of your places that you reside, the distance in which you're connecting these things, and going to Gothic in the summer, right? Like transportation and transit to a certain degree is it. So how do you do this? Next slide. Well, you got to start from the people that matter the most. And if you are not, I presume most people are on here because they're kind of like, yeah, I think transit's part of this, right? I'm like, you're the believers, so this is great, right? People who may be checking in a couple of weeks from now watching this, maybe you're not so many of the believers, and you're like, I'm not sure about this. And then there's the people who are saying no, and that's good. We need everybody in this conversation. But here's the common thread of why transit needs to be local and loved. Everything you do in Crested Butte, the water you drink, the beer you get at the store, the slice you get at Secret Stash, it's all connected to transit. It's like the Kevin Bacon game, right? You may not be or identify as a transit rider, but you are connected to that transit system and how you live and survive in Crested Butte and in the valley. And just like water and utilities, transit is a critical utility that binds everybody together, and it cannot be underfunded. It can't be underserved. It needs to be this orchestrated action that brings life to the community. And if you look at the people who need it the most, which is typically where this conversation starts, yes, that's important, but I want you to flip it. I want people who are maybe hearing about this or watching this, who need it the least, to want it the most. If you need it the least, maybe you want it the most. Get back to that question of yes. What if a transit system that you designed was actually great for your property values? What if it actually saved your life during a wildfire? What if it saved your family's life during a wildfire? What if it was a generational gift you could pass on that was part of your legacy, right? These are the bigger questions about transit that are worth answering in this exercise. Of course, you're going to get to some point, you're going to talk about dollars and cents and routes and vehicles, but this is the beginning of the journey, right? And this is the question of ask yourself as a community, or ask yourself who's someone watching this, how transit touches your life or makes your life better. And because it does, and you're such a small place where it's critical. And so that's why it's got to be local and loved. It can't be contrived, and it's not currently, but the plans you make moving forward need to be local and loved. So, okay, fine. You don't want a gondola. That's not the right technology. Okay, great. Then local and loved means something else for you, but you got to move on that, and it's got to be connected to your world, because it impacts not only the people who need it the most, who are, people who we see in these photos here and have typical conversations around transit about, it's also the people who need it the least. Next slide. So then this is really important, and it is something that I think as a contributor to the Compass, I didn't contribute enough towards, and I want to make sure it gets part of this conversation this time, which is the people who don't have a voice in the process, who will need transit more into the future, are represented and thought about, right? We are all just travelers on this big rock, which is the Earth, and particularly in amazing places. You are travelers in Crested Butte for a small amount of time relative to how long all these places and areas have been here. Relative to what the geological formation of Crested Butte is, we represent a small piece of time where we're inhabiting this space. And people who were long before all of us inhabited this space, right, made decisions and thoughts about how it should evolve and become. So our job as a society, and what you're working on with transit, is to not characterize people in groups, and to think about what group needs what, and what. I'm not a trans rider, you're a trans rider, right? I like Bud, you like Bud Light. That's not the conversation. The conversation is to go beyond who you are as borders. And in this case, the starting point is go beyond Crested Butte, the border, and think about Gunnison, think about CB South, right? I break for Altamont, right? So like, think about these places that are connected to you that will become the way that you thrive and survive, right? You don't have to go very far into the Roaring Fork Valley to understand the decisions that were made 22 years ago about establishing a transit agency, about doing things different, about saying, hey, CDOT, we're not going to add another lane, we're going to add a managed lane, right? Hey, CDOT, we're going to need less park. I mean, there's a heresy 20 years ago, right? Going beyond your borders to think ahead. Next slide. And where this really manifests for me, and I think is really important, is that there are so many people in your valley who want access to serve and be part of your community that you're missing out on if you think about these traditional borders. You don't have to go very far in POW, the Protect Our Winters website, to understand that we are doing a terrible job in diversity on the mountain. And the future that we hold dear with our world and the choices that we have give us the opportunity to, and particularly in the Gunnison area, have people represented from various backgrounds, lived experiences as part of this transit journey in your community. And so I will follow up with Mel because there's no chat, but there's multiple great pieces written about indigenous populations who are now present in Gunnison, people who have migrated up from Mexico and love and serve this area, and will benefit, had the most impact during COVID, and could have the most benefit in terms of providing a variety of great things to your valley and region, in terms of the services you need, in terms of the cultural aspects that continue to make Crested Butte a cool, great, funky place to be. And those connections between transportation services and moving people around are connected to that. So it's not just the wallet delivery system to the mountain, as we used to call it in Breckenridge, right? It's not the wallet delivery system. It's a human experience system. and going beyond your borders in a variety of ways to access people who are not part of this conversation, working with the Gunnison County group who's working on how populations travel in and around the county is key. So, okay, you don't like that part of the conversation. I hear it. I am seeing you say that I don't like that part of the conversation. Then for a second, think about other communities who have felt the same way and were reluctant to expand their transit system and think about new creative ways to serve a variety of people. They're in trouble now. Financially, they're in trouble because you can't run a transit system or run a business without having access to a variety of people to love and serve your community. So if you're not on board with the social movement of it, I can understand that, but know that there's an economic connection to isolation, and you don't have to go much further, right? Up 30, 40, 50, 60 miles in the area to see that transportation services are an economically successful program that should be integrated in beyond the social capital it creates. Okay, next slide. So that's the Pink Floyd album, right? That's the bigger experience, right, that we're talking about with transit. So we're gonna ask you a few questions, and then we're gonna ask you to brainstorm a little bit with us. So this one, right? Are you a transit rider? Are you someone that says yes or no? And once again, right, no's are okay, yeses are okay. This is, I would have put maybe, Mel. That would have been kind of interesting, and then have kind of follow up on the maybe, right? But like, how are you identifying? Are you a transit rider, right? Give you another 30 seconds. I'm going to take a drink of water and a breath for a minute. So give me a second. Okay. All right. So we got a lot of the people who see the experience on here, right? And I'd like you to think for a second, if we ask this question at the high school, right? Would we get this? Maybe, probably. What if we ask this on a job site, right? Where people are bringing tools and lumber and variety of goods. What would that look like, right? What if we ask this question in Gunnison, right? So like, we got a little bit of rider bias in here, which is okay, right? We need the people who believe to help us talk through, but I often want to make sure we have these conversations, recognize who is and isn't in the room. Next slide. So, okay, we got a lot of people in here who say, hey, I'm transit rider. So then this one is, okay, but how many of us know somebody who's a transit rider? So this is not you, but this is like, do you know somebody? Is your life connected somehow to someone who's a transit rider? Like, and so if you're answering no here, like, I don't know anybody who rides this thing. I don't know anybody who does this at all, right? This is like, I'm not connected to them, which is okay, right? That's part of the experience. You may not know that, right? And as you move on with the rest of your day in a little bit here, as we wrap this kind of experience up, I think the question that I want to leave you with when we talk about this is, as this process moves forward and there's more visioning and there's options and they're like, oh, I want to get this thing, right? Always reflect back on this moment and these questions and say, okay, well, I want this thing, but is the thing that I want the best thing for Crested Butte, the best thing for someone who's not a transit rider, right? In this case, right? This whole idea of going through a transportation plan, and specifically around transit, is thinking beyond. So I know this is really hard. Like, I'm no expert at this. You can ask anybody in my family, but thinking about beyond oneself into, okay, that might not be my thing, but I get why it's good for everybody else, or it might ultimately be good for me. I just don't know that yet. These are the questions to ponder. Next slide. So, okay, here's your chance. So we can do questions, which I'm like, okay, questions are fine. Responses are better, right? This is your plan, right? This is your town. So if you do have technical questions or questions about the Pink Floyd experience, great. But more so, we want to hear your reactions. And reactions are great. Like, I agree with this piece. I totally disagree with this piece. Or like, hey, staff, we would like to know more about a certain thing that we heard, right? Those are equally as good as questions. So go for it. We have another, I think, Mel, we have another like 15 minutes or so, or 14 minutes or so.
Yeah, we can pretty much go right up until 1 o'clock. And I just wanted to say too, feel free to hit that raise hand button as well if you'd like to ask your question rather than type it in. We have our first question up. And I think, Carlos, you're a great person to answer this. Is a gondola system really feasible?
Yes, right? We're in the mindset of yes. Anything's feasible. So is it engineering feasible? Of course, right? We built, engineers built a subway system underneath the bay in Oakland with like no computers back in 50s and 60s. So yeah, like, is it engineering possible? Yes. Can you fund it? Well, that would be a matter of choices, right? You would be talking about a pretty significant investment. So is it feasible from a cost perspective? Sure, you're Crested. You could do that, right? Is it politically feasible? Is it environmentally feasible? Is it the lowest carbon, highest, best use still today? I don't know. But I think if you say no in the beginning, you preclude learning what other options may be better, right? So I think it's really important to get to yes in terms of all these things and then lay them on the table. Can you ballpark the price of a tram, gondola? I'm not sure what an aerial lift from downtown to the Martin. I've never heard that word before. Maybe it's funicular, but I'm not sure. I know what a funicular is, but I don't know what a funitil is. So I can, if you give me a minute or two, I can, and I ballpark it based on two systems that are proposed right now. And I ballpark it based on the cost of the Breck Connect gondola, which goes from the town in Breckenridge through Cucumber Gulch up to the new peak station, right? So before we leave, I have to open a document, which I don't have here, which I did preview, but I will give you a ballpark for that.
In the meantime, Carlos, we have a hand up from Mark Tardif, so we'll just kind of switch between hands up and the screen.
Cool.
But Mark, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to ask your question.
Yeah, so this is a thorny question, and I don't know how we approach it. We have people here with many, many different lifestyles. And part of that is that we also live in a state that has legalized marijuana. I've been on the Mountain Express bus up to the mountain with people off-gassing pot smoke like you wouldn't believe. And how do we integrate that, which is a legitimate lifestyle, I suppose, with a family with a couple of small kids? In my view, they're going to get on that bus once and never do it again.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of yes there, right? So you could create buses, right, that are marijuana friendly, right? You could go to the whole other side and say, hey, we're really going to crack down on this, right? I don't know how well those work. You can create incentives, right? There are places that create incentives for good behavior, right? Like we do sometimes with people who are struggling, right? So I think that there is a culture, there is a fun type of environment, right? And there's technical reasons. There's also like this notion of like the service, right? Like if you had different vehicles in your fleet and those vehicles don't allow you to kind of get so many people on the vehicles, and you're a little more kind of exposed to whether you're going to be doing that on the vehicle, there's a kind of policing nature to that, so to speak, right? Like it's harder to to vape and kind of, sneak the beer on and be drinking it in a smaller vehicle, or even like in a car or a minivan compared to a larger vehicle. So there's a variety of yes in there, right? They're just choices you can make.
Yeah.
Mel, are there other ones you want to pull out?
Yeah, would you mind talking about how might transit play a role in evacuating from a wildfire?
Yeah, thank you so much for whoever brought that up. I mean, I previewed it. So I lived in Louisville, Colorado, and my family evacuated during the fire. And prior to that, a colleague of mine, one of my really good friends, was in Katrina, and spent 10 years after Katrina working on emergency evacuation plans for the Gulf Shores as a result of that. So I got to see firsthand what it's like when you're unprepared for evacuation. And Louisville had a grid of streets. Louisville had multiple ways out. Louisville had RTD as a transit system, and Louisville had school bus resources. Crested Butte's grossly unprepared for that type of situation that will likely occur. And it could be fire, it could be mudslide, it could be a variety of natural disasters that are all in our world now that are presenting themselves almost weekly that need to be addressed. And the people who are most vulnerable are the ones who will suffer the most or have the fewest options. And as a community, and I mean community in the sense of community, it's incumbent on this plan to identify how the transit system is going to reverse out and evacuate people. I'll give you one example that really stood out to me out of the whole evacuating from the Marshall Fire experience. We were going through an area that had just burnt through, and the fire was on the other side of the road. And there were people running out of Costco who had access to vehicles, but they were just in the midst of the fire, or they had been engulfed. And at that point, they were carless evacuees. They had to get to some point because their vehicle was inaccessible to get to safety. And so this notion that, well, like, I have a car, I can load it up, I could get out, right? Like, well, you may not. you may be downtown, like someone just mentioned, like having a good time, having some brownies, and like you need to get out. So when I was speaking earlier about like local and love, and like it's part of the experience, this is it. Like, you are going to need a delivery system of vehicles out of your community, designated locations where people can go. Jeremy is going to be the epicenter of that movement. And if you think it won't happen, I can tell you it will, for a variety of reasons that maybe not even be natural disasters anymore, that you'll need to do that.
Thank you, Carlos. Can you talk about, is there a way to seamlessly tie together low density on-demand services with fixed route premium systems?
Yeah. So there is, and the models for this are coming out of places that you wouldn't expect. In the rural communities throughout the West, because people are deciding to age in place. And so the model of on-demand, app-based or phone call-based systems that could link together people is the most cost-effective and the only way really to serve lower density type of places that are dispersed. And in that case, in that instance, what you're doing also is using smaller vehicles, right? So you're not using, and the labor cost is the cost mostly to run the system, right? But there is a vehicle cost, and we're talking about electrification of your network, right? Smaller vehicles, electric vehicles, trips that are linked together are the way to do that. Is it a panacea? No way. But it can be done. There are models for that. And then I think the most important part, though, is you have so many choices moving forward about, yes, related to land use. Transportation is land use. Transportation is land use. Transportation is land use. They're like Oreo cookies, right? You cannot have the good, yummy middle without the ends, because if not, you just have a marshmallow. So transportation is land use, and those two things are so embedded together. So there have been choices made about land use, and now to that point, the question just made, like, how do you connect those things? Well, you got to kind of come up with creative ways to do it. But to the degree that you can have land use in responsible places where you have existing transit utility, those are the ones that are going to provide the best quality of life, be most socially responsible, and at the end of the day, provide the least amount of impact to this fragile place that you live.
So you talked a lot about electrification. If everyone is driving around in EVs, is it really necessary to invest in mass transit?
I mean, EVs are still cars, right? I mean, let's not forget that they're still sheet metal and they have really terrible materials that we have to mine this earth to build, including like, rubber and precious metals that are required. So, like EVs also displace environmental justice in terms of electrification generation. So they're not the panacea. Shared usage is really key, right? So like, like how many Toyota Tacomas do you have in town? Does everybody need a Toyota Tacoma? Like, there was a time when we shared resources and we were like neighborly around that, right? And like, so everybody driving around, would you need transit? Well, I think you'd end up with the problem at the four-way that Troy tells me about and Mel tells me about like traffic, right? So there is a piece of this about the fewer people driving around, even if they're driving around in golf carts or EVs, are still going to create the sheet metal problem in your community. And you are stewards of this amazing place, right? We all love it, right? And sometimes maybe we all love it to death, but like, we want to come be part of this experience where we can be car free or live in this great, like pretend like we live in this great place. If you have cars everywhere, it's like going to Breckenridge. It's no different. So the EV piece is not the solution. The shared piece, the choice piece is key, right? I think it's about choice. You live in the West, you're very active, hey Duke lives type of people, right? You want choice and you want to not be told what to do. Well, those are great ways to design your system. You could design your goal for the transit system would be, we want choice and we want to be told not to do a certain thing. Great, well then you could have all of these great options, right? It's not about one thing.
So I'm going to tie together a few questions and comments, but first someone wrote that a few to tell is a gondola with two parallel cables for wind stability. Thank you for that. I did not know what that was either. And then also a question around, could we look at having trains come back into Crested Butte? But with both of those, so Little Cottonwood Canyon has struggled with implementing a gondola. How do you recommend kind of opening those new types of transit up to discussion?
Yeah. Okay, so the gondola, was there the gondola question first? Was there a gondola question there? It was like, is the technology feasible? Was that the question?
Or how do you open it up to discussion? Any words of wisdom?
Yeah, okay, thank you. These are wonderful. And these are about you, right? These are the questions you should be having conversations about with your members in your community. The first one that's going to take the hardest summit on the gondola, so to speak, is going to be the environmental one, right? There's going to be consequences to any action you take, right? But the gondola will have visual consequences that people will want to ponder and think through. There will be ground level impacts during the construction, right? And then there will be people who may reside near it, who are going to have some noise that was not previously there. Hopefully, maybe it's less than the Bluebird bus going up the hill, but it may be moving it around, right? So, so the environmental piece of that, and then weighing that against the other environmental choices that have been spewing for 20 years is critical. And then the second one's always funding, right? So it's always environmentally, can we do this? And then two, funding. Well, we're living in a watershed moment. I said this a year ago and it came true. You don't have to like this either. It's even part of me doesn't like this, but we're in a watershed funding moment in terms of getting infrastructure funded in this country. We are really in a renaissance. And to the degree that this plan identifies whatever your choice is, a train, a funicular, a gondola, there are funding sources available. You are missing out on getting the money if you do not set priorities and tell Jeremy, go do. We have the matching funds available. We're going to make choices with the limited funding we have to match the federal fundings that are available. But your moment is now. And the gondola only gets, any technology, but particularly a gondola, it only gets more expensive every year you wait. And so that feasibility is possible. When we built the Shock, I was part of the team that recommended and did the preliminary design for the Shock Hill gondola, the Breck Connect gondola, right? The Cucumber Gulch issue, which is in the middle of it, was a renaissance moment. We turned a no into a yes. And the reason why we did that is we expanded the cable and the towers further apart. So there wasn't ever going to be this impact in this really sensitive area. We used funding to reestablish riparian corridors in that area so that those areas were going to be better, right? Like, how often do you get to say it's better because we did that? Those are the type of questions that are worth asking in this process. And then the train. So the train, sure, why not, right? There you have right away throughout the valley coming up from Gunnison, right? There are technologies available now with propulsion that weren't available 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So this is your moment to say, why not? What you need to do though is say, is that worth $130 million a mile, right? Like a bus rapid transit system, getting more effective with that. Maybe that's $15 million a mile. If I want a train and I want it to go long, you got to weigh those costs. But this is the moment to say everything's possible.
So we have so many fantastic questions. I think we only have time for one or two more, but rest assured we will get to all these questions as a community throughout this process. So hang tight at the end of ways to continue engaging. But Carlos, can a community adopt reduced dependence on cars without sacrificing convenience? And is an attitude shift needed by community members to get to yes?
Yeah, you can. It's about choice. I really want to reinforce the fact that transit, and it's not like it's not a guilt thing, right? I think sometimes our profession, my profession, transportation planning, has made people feel guilty about having a Tundra, a Toyota Tundra, right? And that's not the point. Like the point is to have choice. So can you get there? Yeah. Can you have people who are sharing vehicles, who want to share vehicles to get rid of payment? Yeah, like people want to do that, right? Not everybody, but people who want to have that choice currently have nothing. Like right now, you have a system in Crested that requires car ownership for activities that you love, right? And has a transit system that's great in town. And then there's not a lot, and you can walk, right? So there's not like this range of choices. So can you get to those? Yes, but you have to make political and financial choices about how this portfolio comes together. Like it'd be like the analogy skiing and biking can easy, but like you have a single speed hardtail and you're like, well, can I really climb up the mountain on that? Or can I really go to Moab on that? And you're like, no, you probably need a full suspension dually Yeti carbon also. And then I gravel ride. Well, then you have a gravel ride. You should be thinking about transportation, particularly transit, as a portfolio, not like a one thing that's going to solve everything. And the most important thing, the thing that you could do to backfire this whole effort is force people to do a certain thing. You are a community of adventurers. You don't want to do that.
And as I wrap up, Carlos, can you give us 1 to 3 surefire points to convince us that transportation is a worthy investment of public funds?
Ah, good one. I like that. Yeah, I'll give you a Republican, a moderate, and a Democrat answer since you asked for 3. So investing in transportation dollar for dollar is a sound economic investment when you provide choice, like I just said. It delivers workers, delivers goods, it creates economic development opportunities, it creates personal choice and responsibility. Investing in cars and more roads is the least equitable, worst investment that Crested Butte can make, right? If you want a valid, sound cost investment, do not exclusively invest in one mode, right? Don't take all your money and put it in the gondola, right? But invest in all of these modes. That's the best one. The moderate in the middle would say, well, we need a balance, right? We need to fund a little bit of everything, and it's a social program. So it shouldn't be seen as what the outcome is, right? We don't go to the park and say, well, how much value did this slide provide us? Or how much value did that parking space offer us, right? It's a social program in the middle. And then on the other spectrum, like the third perspective, third bullet point is, yeah, like our world is burning and changing around us, and you're one crisis situation away from trying to evacuate out 10,000 people that you don't know about in cars. And just the environmental piece alone of having a functioning transit system that can add ways to get people evacuated out in emergency is worth doing it alone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Carlos. We are at 1 o'clock. So again, if we didn't get to your question, we apologize, but please continue engaging in this plan because we will be discussing all those great questions as a community. Let's all give a big round of applause for Carlos from our Zoom boxes, and then just stay on for 30 more seconds on those next steps. So if you have not taken the mobility survey yet, please pull out your phone and pull up that QR code or go to our transportation plan website to take that survey. It should take you less than 10 minutes and just gives us such great information to help inform this plan. And then our phase 2 is coming up very soon. So save the date for May 4th, Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you to join us for that transportation open house where we can dig into some of these questions, learn from the data we have. And then the focus area workshops in late May and early June is where we're really going to drill into the details. So there's a list of those workshops up there. Please email us if you're interested in signing up. We'll be sending out save the dates for those in the next couple of weeks. And please just reach out if you have any other questions or thoughts as we move into our challenges and opportunities phase of this plan. So thank you all so much. This wraps up our 5-part introductory lunch and learn series. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. And thank you so much, Carlos. We really appreciate you being here. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks again, Carlos.
You are